Morning, Ragoobarsingh again.
Once again.
Hi, good morning, guys. Good morning, Marcus.
Morning, Richard.
All right. So did you get
And
Devil's
welcome.
Advocate? My vote for Devil's Advocate, you say no. And Moneymaker also said no.
You want to button the shit properly?
What this?
We think it's virus or something?
Oh, I was doing a little sexiness this morning.
Unnecessary.
There are many people watching this YouTube stream.
And we want to keep it that way.
And
Exactly. I just boosted it just by saying I'm doing sexy this morning.
You-
100 people just started to click into the YouTube.
all our attorneys feel like it's virus or Rari. So if you like it, button on your shit.
You know, if I just
Faris and Rari is the gold standard of sexiness among
Apparently, a button on shits anyway.
if I take my shirt off, that's it. We hit 1 million views there.
Yeah, of the wrong kind of views, though.
Oh, okay. All right.
Can you all
Let's get the
behave?
results.
Can you all behave? We have a guest in studio.
You see how sedate Marcus is? We'll discuss why.
There we go. There we go. I had my morning coffee.
Good morning, coffee.
Coffee again.
I am now having mine, Marcus, as you can see.
I feel like
As for our results,
you'll not be long here and it will be
Recording in progress.
so our poll this morning, are women and girls being adequately protected in Trinidad and Tobago? That's our poll this morning. And we had 28 people voting on the poll this morning. I don't know if you have those figures, Paul, but 28, 24 of you said no, you do not believe that women and girls are adequately protected in Trinidad and Tobago. 4 of you said yes. So 24, 4. And of course, you can continue to vote on this poll throughout the day, throughout programming, and we'll give you the final results tomorrow morning, which will be Friday.
Was it the men or the women who said yes?
I didn't really aggregate it in that kind of way.
Let's see. I have to look.
Morning, Marcus Ramkisson. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Good morning, guys. Thanks
I
for
have to
having
be
me.
circumspect to how I participate, but I saw the former Attorney General on another radio station discussing cannabis control, so I
Right.
guess if you could do it, I could do it too.
Yeah.
Let's just put it that way.
We're not discussing a bill that's before a joint select committee. That's not allowed.
It's a report. Yeah.
Exactly. We're discussing something that's before the Senate, so that's fine as far as I'm aware.
Mm-hmm. I assume you. I assume you're pretty familiar with the bill, Marcus.
Yes, I have been the main consultant to the former Attorney General's office for both the decriminalization bill, that's the Dangerous Drugs Amendment Bill of 2019, which is now an act and law, and for this cannabis control bill. Of course, I am an advisor. Not everything I advise the government will take, right? This is that's their choice what they want to take and how they set up the framework. I can just advise to the best of my ability. I'm also, guys, just for those who don't know and who are listening, I remain one of the most qualified, educated cannabis advisors on the face of the planet. I'm very proud of it, actually.
On the face of the planet, that's a
Yeah,
big
yeah.
order.
A big one. It's a big one, man. And you and I like to discuss big ones. I'm going into that just now too. But yeah, I have currently over 76 certifications, including 60 accredited cannabis medical certifications, CMEs, which are usually reserved for physicians. But because I did pre-med up to first year med, I was allowed to and was able to understand. I've since created and delivered continuing medical education CME courses for the Trinidad and Tobago Medical Association, which are official international CMEs at this point in time. I have a post-baccalaureate certificate in regulatory affairs for cannabis control, and I completed last year, we're 22, my master's degree certificate, Master of Science certificate in.
So you're not just a smoker?
No, I am one of the most educated cannabis control.
No, I'm saying that with the greatest of seriousness, because very often advocates are persons who smoke and they have the right to advocate because they smoke, but you come with a little more gravitas behind you.
Exactly. Now, I was an activist and advocate for well over 14 years in this country. Publicly, I think I've been started on the radio talking about cannabis boldly while it was prohibited from 2008. And so I've been there before a lot of the newer activists and advocates. And from there, about 2012, I started seeking patient.
Well, I spent 2+ years of my life on this committee, so I know a little bit about cannabis now too.
Yes, you should, as you well should.
Even though I'm not a smoker.
Yeah. So just for your viewers to understand that, my point of view comes from the point of view of having written most of the provisions that went.
And you've studied extensively, so as I said, there's gravitas behind what you say. You're not just talking off the top of your head.
And there's a lot of unique work that I've created, actually. And I shouldn't say a lot. There's some of my unique work that I've created for the industry that's presented in the bill before the House and Senate. So it's good to see that happen. I just do, of course, some concerns, which hopefully we'll be able to air out this morning.
Yeah. But I suppose we could start on that. I suppose that's a good point to start, Marcus. In terms of the bill that's currently before the Senate,
report.
Let's start it. The report. Let's start it there. Is it good? A good report to lead to good legislation, or are there some fundamental flaws that concern you?
All right. So that's I see Paul did say and correct you just now the report, but the report is the report of the Joint Select Committee after their 2-year deliberations, which shows which clauses and provisions they addressed, what were their concerns, how those concerns were addressed by the presenters of the bill, and what was changed and so forth, right? So, and within the report is the bill, the amended bill from the Joint Select Committee. So we do have to look at it also as the bill going forward, because once we pass the report, we're also passing the bill, right? Correct?
Yeah.
Yes, that's right.
So within the report, I would say that a lot more work, a lot more questions from the Joint Select Committee could have been answered by the progenitors of the bill. A lot of the answers, as you can see from the report, was that a lot of the issues can be taken care of in the regulations. It is my opinion that there are a few core concepts. Now what the listeners need to understand is that there's primary legislation and subsidiary. Primary is the bill and the act, the law, right? And subsidiary is the regulations that you keep hearing about. Primary legislation must have, or at least must touch on all the core concepts of the regulated industry, of the topic that the bill is addressing, right? Before you can expand on those points in the regulations. You're not supposed to, by legislative drafting, and I am not a lawyer or a legislative drafter, but I've picked up a lot about legislative drafting working with the governments in the Caribbean over the last few years. You can't go and have something in the regulations that was not touched on in the primary, because then you would be able to put almost anything you want in subsidiary legislation without being passed necessarily, especially if any regulations were to undergo negative resolution, which this won't, but just in case, that's the format of things. So I think there's some clauses that are missing from the primary legislation that should be included in the primary legislation. And there's a little bit of misunderstanding of the concept of the industry by both the government and the opposition, actually, and a couple of those things we'll get into now. So within our bill, we see the provision for medicinal cannabis to be issued by a practicing physician or medical practitioner, either by a medical prescription or medical recommendation. And then see that medicinal cannabis can then be sourced at either a pharmacy or a dispensary. Cannabis dispensary is what it's supposed to be called, but it's just referred to as dispensary in the bill. When you see that there's two ways of issuing and 2 ways of sourcing, you don't see any differentiation between the medicinal cannabis that is to be issued or recommended, or is to be dispensed by pharmacy or a dispensary. There's no differentiation, and it's all medicinal cannabis. Why do we have a dual system? Whereas most other jurisdictions, you would find one or the other, prescription to pharmacy, recommendation to dispensary, or such, right? I'll tell you what happened. In 2018, when I did the Antiguan legislation, while we were doing the primary legislation there, St. Vincent had the opportunity and the benefit of seeing some of the earlier drafts of the primary legislation. They built their primary legislation on that, based on that, and modified it because they did not understand the concept, because they didn't have the subsidiary legislation at the time. Barbados Barbados used the Antiguan and Vincentian primary legislation, built theirs, and Trinidad based ours on the Barbados legislation very heavily. I've done a comparison report for University of Barbados, the University of West Indies in Barbados, and you can see where word for word a lot of our provisions, especially in the establishment of the authority section, is taken directly from Barbados. These three countries, besides Antigua, of course, did not have the subsidiary legislation of Antigua because that's not online. You have to go in the government printry in Antigua and pay money to get the regulations, and that's why they didn't have it. Within those regulations are explained, even though it was in the Antiguan primary, separation of terms for medicinal cannabis, which would include prescribable and non-prescribable medicinal cannabis. This will allow us to then be able to separate those types of medicinal cannabis into the type that would be prescribed and recommended, dispensed by pharmacy, dispensed by dispensary. What is the difference? Realistically, and most doctors can attest it, you cannot write a traditional medical prescription for a cannabis plant. I'm not saying you can't do it for a plant. I'm saying you can't do it for a cannabis plant. Why? Because the level of THC at the top of a single plant is way different from the level of THC at the bottom of the same plant. You can have, for instance, 10% THC in the flowers at the top of the plant and 2% THC at the flowers at the bottom, which prevents you from elucidating an exact standardized dose from cannabis flowers, which is necessary to write a traditional prescription. For this reason, those types of products, which include cannabis flowers, which include intoxicating cannabinoids, which include edibles, should be recommended and sourced at a medical cannabis dispensary. So prescribable will be those products you can get the exact standardized dose from, those things you're accustomed seeing now. And I have a point to make on what you're seeing now. At the pharmacies and all that stuff, you know, the pills, the tinctures, all that, the CBD stuff. And a physician will be able to write a prescription for an exact dose and give that to you. You fill that at a pharmacy and you're good to go.
Just for clarity, Marcus, because I mean, you are the expert and I ain't no expert on cannabis. What you're talking about in terms of these prescription issuances, is it, they include pills, they include CBD oil, do they include actual joints?
No, that's what we're
so let's differentiate so people can understand, because
so let me do it one more time. I just didn't want to bore you with the technical.
No, bore me, because presume we know nothing.
Cool. So prescribing, so again, because the plant, the flowers that you smoke, which is medicinal, right? And smoking and vaporization is also accepted methods of delivery, albeit smoking is not encouraged combustion because it carries with it
carcinogens.
Right, and carcinogens, whereas vaporization does not. Those because the plant has the different levels of THC, it cannot be prescribed. It should not be prescribed, right? If it does, the doctor is making a mess of a prescription. So if you have these products that you're already accustomed to seeing, the pills, the tinctures, the CBD oils and stuff in the pharmacy, and you now label that as prescribable, what you're actually doing is that you're not trampling upon the well-established, long-standing rights of physicians to prescribe and of pharmacists to dispense any controlled drug.
And in any case, those products are going to be under the stricture of the Food and Drug Association, or in our case, whatever the equivalent is. So they're going to actually be regulated in that way. Not so.
They have to, so every product.
But you have to import those or manufacture those to the standards.
Import or manufacture. Correct.
Right.
Under certain standards, correct. And yes, chemistry, food and drugs is supposed to go through every pharmaceutical or herbal or product that you see in a pharmacy. Right. We have CFD, chemistry, food and drugs, and Bureau of Standards. Bureau of Standards does more food and beverages and non-consumable products. But once it comes to certain aspects like pharmaceuticals, medicine, things with health claims, that's chemistry, food and drugs.
Right.
Every product must be approved before it's on the shelf. Now, I'll come back to that point in a minute. Right. If you do this separation, guys, right, then you have your non-prescribable medicinal cannabis, which is your flowers, your intoxicating cannabinoids, your edibles, being issued by the physician and recommended, because there's no dose. You see, like how we have this 30-day supply in the legislation. That is only applicable to drugs that you can prescribe, because again, a prescription says take 100 milligrams 3 times a day, and when you fill in the prescription, you can only get a 10-day supply, a 20-day supply, according to what's written in the prescription. That is not the case with medicinal cannabis. medicinal cannabis flowers, guys. The traditional way a patient uses medicinal cannabis flowers is that the doctor would recommend by way of stating on a piece of paper, I, the physician, think that medicinal cannabis flowers can be beneficial for this patient, for his ailment. I therefore recommend that he should use them in an attempt to ease his ailment, something of this nature, right? And they go to the dispensary with that. They get their medical cannabis identification card. You notice our legislation says specifically you produce your national card. You always have to produce an ID card with a prescription. That's regular practice. They misunderstood the concept that these individuals who are now going to buy cannabis flowers, which needs to be traced and tracked for the international laws, especially, they would have a medical cannabis identification card. Instead of walking with his recommendation everywhere, they could go swipe. And instead of getting a 30-day supply, they would be allowed to buy X amount, X legislated amount per day, maybe 30 grams, right? What would prevent them from buying every day? The tracking and monitoring system, which we will get to if we have time, which needs to be implemented, I think, in the primary legislation, but yes, it can be implemented in the subsidiary legislation, which is best practice all over the world, where you tag each plant to an extent, basically, to make it short, where you cannot even take 1 gram from the plant without the authority knowing, right? And that also tracks the patient. So if I'm a patient and I go by your dispensary and I buy 30 grams, if I go to try to go by Richard dispensary and I buy another 30 grams, the system will flag me. And the authority will be able to warrant an investigation to see if I'm buying to sell or anything of this nature. Understand? Right. Now, when that patient goes to the dispensary, they go, and after they are cleared and all that, they have a choice of maybe 20 different cannabis flowers, 20 strains. There are thousands and tens of thousands of strains, and each one has a unique cannabinoid profile that may or may not work better or not for someone's ailment. We don't have the science yet at all to tell you this strain of cannabis. We can tell you CBD, THC, active ingredients, but we can't tell you this strain of cannabis works better for this ailment or not. So I, as a patient, going in there to 20 strains of cannabis, I now want to choose the strain by sight and smell. What looks appealing to me and what smells appealing to me. And you guys know cannabis has a very noxious scent. So it's not something that you just go into the place and buy off the shelf in a bottle, in a bag, traditionally. You can, but that's not really how the industry works. And then that patient, myself, will choose over the course of a few weeks, hey, you know what? This one seems to work a lot better for my ailment. Let me stick to this one. And that's how it works. That's the whole science at this point behind cannabis, behind medicinal cannabis flowers, right? Right, different aspect. And it's very usable, especially people with cancer pain and so forth. Wow, you wouldn't believe it. In California, when I was a patient there back in 2007, you wouldn't believe the age of people. I would see people in their 70s to 90s filling the cannabis lounge on a daily basis and easing their pain by use of, smoking, right, and vaporizing cannabis flowers. So very medicinal also. For that reason, you can't have the 30-day supply. For that reason, the dispensary is separate from the pharmacy. And I have to make that quick point. The Minister of Health did say in his contribution in the House that when asked by the MP Rushton Paré that, what is the dispensary? And the Minister of Health said, well, you should know, having a pharmacy, that the dispensary is going to be that place within a pharmacy that the pharmacist dispenses from. Therefore, alluding that the pharmacy and dispensary in the bill is the same thing. Whereas in the interpretation section of the bill, it does define the dispensary to state that patients may consume their medication in the dispensary. Have you ever gone to a pharmacy and see somebody take up a tablet behind the counter with the pharmacist? That's not allowed. So the minister was not understanding, unfortunately, the concept of the bill. And that's what I want to make sure that the government gets clear, the concept of it going forward, that this dispensary is a standalone facility where you can purchase your non-prescribable medicinal cannabis when you're recommended, that follows the guidelines of a pharmacy, does have a pharmacist dispensing at the same time, but it is standalone. This also represents positive economic diversification, because then you're creating more unique opportunities for skilled and non-skilled labor, right? One point on this, which is that we can be the first country in the world to effect classification of cannabis medicine into prescribable and prescription only and over-the-counter. All medication in the world is classified basically as those two things, either prescription or over-the-counter. As you all well know, if you go now into the pharmacies, you can get CBD oil. It's never behind the counter. It's all over the counter, right? Mind you, that's illegal, but we'll come back to that just now. The world has not been able to make this classification because cannabis flowers has never been separated into the prescribable and non-prescribable, as I put forward, right? If we do this, then the prescribed medicinal cannabis can be separated. How do you separate? You can get acetaminophen, paracetamol over the counter, or you can get it on prescription. What's the difference? The amount of active ingredients.
Dosage, yeah.
So with studies done by myself and others, actually, we can now ascertain the dosage that is necessary to separate CBD, not the other cannabinoids, unfortunately, but CBD, because we don't have enough research on the others, for the amount that should be in an over-the-counter drug, the amount that should be in a prescription-only drug, and we can be the first country in the world to effectually do what you're supposed to do in medicine and make that separation through now having this prescribable and non-prescribable. And this is why I think that terminology needs to be in the primary legislation, as it represents a core concept.
Why do you think that hasn't been considered in other countries that have long gone down this road?
To be really honest with you, Paul, I mean, I've gotten my job with governments, right, in the region, and I've spoken with governments outside the region in Europe. And they find me extremely intelligent in the topic. And you know why? One of the main things. I mean, I think personally, you can read and figure out what you need to, right? But one of the main things is that they don't understand the industry, how it can be legislated. And they simply don't understand the intricacies of what the technocrats usually do in drafting, right? And then if you go to drafters, the drafters don't understand the concept of the industry itself well enough. And there's so much misinformation online that, I mean, this is why I have a degree. The stuff I learned in my degree, I can't find online, right? And I'm a researcher. So they did an excellent job with that program also. So it really comes down to a lack of understanding on different levels. And that's why we've not seen things move forward. Then there's also monopolies. Look, there's a company in Europe that it's called Bedrocan that has a monopoly on the medicinal. They are the only supplier of medicinal cannabis, or have been for 20 years in Europe. So you could have gone to the pharmacies and gotten the flower with a plus or minus 10% of the active ingredients. And that's ridiculous because 1% THC is very different from 10% THC. No, it's not.
What do you think about the applications or the clause that relates to religious use?
Right. So that's that's my second main point. I took the time to explain the prescribable, non-prescribable. There's many points I can make to you guys this morning, but I'm trying to focus on the main aspects of it that can be addressed in the committee stage during the passage of this bill still. And I mean, I would at least like the government to address the issues in their presentation, so that if it is that they're saying, okay, yes, these things will come in the regulations, so sure, we know these things already and we understand it, then I'm fine, right? It can happen, but it should be addressed. The religious aspect, yes, you can look at it two ways, yeah? You can look at it as legislation that may not be as feasible as it should be, or you can look at it as a country being courageous, right? I'll tell you why. Allowing for religious use is not allowed by the international treaties. And the international treaties, once ratified by a country such as ourselves, means that we must follow that rule of international law. Paul and I have had a discussion once right here on the radio, and I was supposed to send him a reference, which I didn't do for months and only sent him a few days ago.
Well, there are two perspectives on ratification. Mm-hmm. There's some countries that adopt international treaties as law, and some countries that have to pass local legislation. So let's just get that out there.
Well, when you say pass local legislation, what you mean is
to support, to bring into law their treaties ratified. I don't think we are one of those countries.
No, we have ratified the treaty after we have put our drug laws into place, which
exactly
based on their guidelines, right? That's why we had the medical allowance and stuff from the 1993 and all that for dangerous drugs. Basically, if you go against these treaties at this point as a country that's ratified, you will receive a warning of non-compliance. They can issue 3 warnings of non-compliance. They can grey list, blacklist, sanction, but they've said the INCB, the International Narcotics Control Board, which is the board that enforces the treaties for the UN, has said to our former Attorney General in Trinidad and their visit in 2019 that they will go no further with countries that are doing cannabis legislation outside of the first warning. And so long as the country ensures that there's no increase in illicit exports due to the regulated market. They don't want to see laws forming in our country and then we using those laws to make illegal cannabis and export, right? So and that's fine. But the first warning of non-compliance, unfortunately, what it's done for Canada, who's received it for going recreational, what it's done in, what's the other country? I wanted to say Jamaica, but I spoke to the CEO of the authority there day before yesterday, sorry. And she's only had a position from 2019. So she says she can't confirm for me whether they've received a warning, but they do know that it's been extremely difficult in terms of banking and getting the exports right and all that stuff.
Uruguay? Is it Uruguay?
No, they have a totally different system. They're entirely government controlled, right? And they actually follow the international law, surprisingly, because they have nothing to do with the exports. They have nothing to do with the government controls it all. It's a very interesting system down there. Within our system, once we go with religious allowances, we receive this first warning, and this first warning can prevent us from engaging in US correspondent banking within the industry, right? Because we're not following the international law, and it can prevent us from exporting under the cannabis legislation. What a handful of companies in Canada does, the biggest exporter of cannabis in the world, is that although they have more than 1,000 licenses, they're literally about a dozen or so that can export. And they have to have 2 different licenses that are issued under Ministry of Health here and other places. It's called a narcotics handling license, which all pharmacists must have, and a narcotics export license specific to the shipment, specific to the drug. In Trinidad and Tobago, we don't have anyone that has ever had a narcotic export license, but we do have 2 importers. Those are the 2 companies that import things like morphine for the hospitals, right? I do hope that when import and export licenses come about and it's time for us to engage in that business, that we don't have to go through those exporters to be able to export. I'm hoping that once all documents are cleared and requirements are met, right, that individuals who are licensed will be able to export their own shipments once everything is met. Going through somebody means that, that person is acting as a middleman. They can actually make more money than you, right? So that's one of the concerns on that part. I think the religious aspects could have been taken care of in a different way. The government is being very bold in moving towards allowing all the licenses they have for religion in our country, who thinks a little more conservatively, in my opinion, than like Jamaica, Antigua. So I think it's a very positive move by the government, right? In the sense of being bold and looking after the citizenry and hearing what your people have said, hearing the Rastafari, especially, that they've been calling for something for so long. But I think it could have been done a little better. And here's what I think could have been done to meet with the international regulations and satisfy the desires of the Rastafari. They have been calling for about 3 things over the decades, right? They have said, we use this plant as a sacrament. We want to be able to use it at home and grow it at home. Well, they got that through the decriminalization bill. We want to use it in our place of worship, because that's where we have our worship ceremonies, that it's part of a sacrament of, and we want to be able to grow it at the place of worship. So it's right there. Well, this bill allows for that, but couldn't an order paper, little thing, right, to the Dangerous Drugs Act, allowing for a certain limited amount of plants at the place of worship and use at the place of worship, registered place of worship, which is a public place. So therefore you'd be making an exception for the public place. Wouldn't that have sufficed much easier and made it less observable by international bodies who are seeking to...
So we avoid getting the
Yeah, but then I didn't see that. But in that case, one, you're trying to fly below the radar. That doesn't mean you won't be caught.
Right.
Two, you understand? Mm-hmm. So and law can't be seen to skirt or try to obscure from being caught. So that's a terrible principle to start with.
Well, look,
right?
the argument,
The way I interpret it's being done doesn't necessarily can't contemplate one religious practice over another in Trinidad and Tobago, because all religious practices have to be seen as equal.
Yes.
So the way it's being done is that, and I asked for a definition of religious organization because it's absent in the bill, which I'm actually crafting in an amendment, right? And I think but I won't say it in here because I won't put it on the floor, right? You have to treat all religions as equal and all registered religious bodies as equal under the NGO Act, and let them apply for what you're calling for in terms of its use by the religious bodies, devotees, as a sacrament under specific conditions, and also they can apply for a cultivator's license to deal with the cultivation part. So it doesn't really negate the way it's presently drafted, achieving what you described there.
Sure. Marcus, I'm hearing you explain all of this, and of course for non-smokers like myself, it's all a lot of information, because I haven't looked at the bill at all, even though I've been an advocate for for the decriminalization of it. I have been an advocate for the decriminalization of it, even though I am not, of course, a smoker of it or end user. But I'm just wondering, in terms of this legislation, because right now people are allowed to plant, I think, up to 4 plants per adult in a household, and you could correct me if I'm wrong. But you still have people buying joints, buying weed, by whatever their corner salesman is. They know where people who smoke weed know where to get weed.
Yes.
And they're not always planting it. Does this bill address that issue? Because that is still illegal. But of course, across Trinidad and Tobago, that's how a lot of weed smokers, even though that they can plant it, a lot of them still buy weed.
You could plant your tomatoes and all the vegetables you eat, do you?
Richard, let me make a bold statement about that. When the government decriminalized marijuana, they had to put on paper. You can't decriminalize the use of marijuana under specific quantities in certain circumstances without providing an avenue for some sort of supply, because then you'd be encouraging the breaking of the law. They knew that, well, even though it was passed and enacted today, you can't plant a tree today legally and get product tomorrow. Am I wrong, Marcus? But decriminalizing the cultivation of 4 plants per adult, per household, opened the door, protected the state, I should say, from seeming to encourage people to break the law.
Yes, correct.
You understand? Yeah. So while, and this bill provides for importation, cultivation, and retail sale, which deals with that supply side of it.
Right, correct.
But in the interim, while this is being done, the state had to provide a lacuna, so to speak, so that it did not seem to encourage breaking the law by decriminalizing.
Absolutely.
Make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah, I hear you. So the retail side that Paul just referenced, what does that retail license involve? Is that like weed cafes that people can go to? What is that?
Right. So medical and religious is a whole different thing. At this point, we're on the religious. We just finished that part of the discussion, right? The reason, Paul, that I think it should be handled in a different way is, just as I said, it is against the international rules that we would be breaking. You do want to have U.S. correspondent.
I think Santa Mark brought that up and asked the question about it.
The U.S. correspondent banking thing, people believe that because it's illegal in the federal U.S., that's the reason you can't engage in U.S. correspondent banking. That's not true. Over 750 U.S. federally regulated banks in the U.S. that engage in medical marijuana banking, right? But they do it when the laws are set by the state or country that meet the international guidelines, just like opium. The opium farmers, Australia just became the latest country a few years ago to grow opium to produce medicines, right? And those guys who grow in opium, which is regulated the same way, get into bank the money. That's because they follow the international guidelines to a T. That's all it is. And you get to bank, you get to do everything properly, right? This is why I fight for getting it done the right way, because then what's going to happen do you think a big company from the US, Canada, wherever, will come to Trinidad.
You just spoke about a country being brave, and isn't part of the process of the evolution, because this is an evolving industry. The world is now coming back out of the dark ages where they did it for tobacco and they did it for alcohol for big business to profit. Let's not kid ourselves. And countries like Trinidad and Tobago and Jamaica and St. Vincent that have a competitive advantage in their climate and their growing and their technology should be pushing the envelope.
Yeah, but the problem that has happened is that now the local guys can get through, because you can bank locally. You could get your money in and out of the bank locally, right? But once you send in money anywhere, even Tobago, right? Because we engage in U.S. correspondent, then that's where the problem happens. So how do you expect investors to come into the country who will provide large opportunities and jobs and all these things and invest if they can't get their money back out?
Do you think if enough countries push back and
no, there's a way to get out.
And show the light that the convention can be changed, because we may be small, but we could punch above our weight class sometimes.
So the first recommendation to change in 50 years came in 2019. It has to come from the WHO, first of all. They've made their recommendation.
That would take forever.
They were voted on in 2020, and out of the 6 recommendations, only 1 passed. You know which one passed? The mistype that they had long time, where they placed cannabis in both Schedule 1 and Schedule 4 in the treaty. So they removed it from Schedule 4. It's still on Schedule 1, which is the most dangerous substance in it, right? Basically. They also, now it's not just religious. Paul, don't get me wrong, it's not just religious use and trade that will give us the problem with the international body. It is the planting of the 4 plants. They don't want any cultivation to take place unless by government license. I think we could get away from that clause in the international by giving a simple $10 license, like what you give to see turtles on the beach and so, right? But they don't want it because it's regarded the same way, it's classed in the same class as opium. It's guided by the exact opium laws in the treaty. So those countries, all the countries that have said, here, 4 plants, 5 plants, 6 plants, realistically, you could go to a high court and say, listen, I want to grow 4 opium plants too.
So do you think we should retroactively, at some point, put in the law that persons who want to grow at home should just apply to the authority for a $10 license? I think it's a good idea, quite frankly.
I think so, just to be within the compliance.
So just to deal with legal technicality.
If we're doing that, Paul.
Why Ragoobarsingh laughing? What's wrong with that?
Because Trinidad and Tobago is so efficient when it comes to bureaucracy. Forgive my cynical laugh.
Well, at least they will be putting it in the legislation, which is important for the international bodies who are looking at it, right? And again, yes, putting an order paper to allow the use in the public place by the religious bodies is one aspect of putting it where they may not see it. But then it also involves removing the trade licenses because they're not going to allow religious trade. Now, here's the third point I was making about the Rastafari. What's the third thing they've been asking for? They've been saying that when this thing comes online, we want to get into it to sell it to make money. And look what we did. We put within our law, if you make $1 on it, we put you into jail. Right? I think that is Mama Guy in the Rastafari. Patronize it.
Yeah, but that doesn't prohibit the Rastafari can apply for a religious license and then a cultivation license, right, and an importation license and an export license. That nothing stops any religious body from doing that.
Under religious,
to make money.
Under religious or medical? Under medical.
I'm talking about they can apply for any license.
No. What I'm saying is
because I haven't seen anywhere in the bill that says if I apply for a religious license, I can apply for cultivation or an export or all of that.
I just want to make sure you're saying it the right way, because you're saying cultivation and export, but remember they're cultivation and export and import for medical and for religious purposes.
Yeah.
Right? Mm-hmm. So the religious purposes ones are all guided under the Non-Profit Organization Act. No trade or business there is allowed to make profits.
Yeah, but you can also, I guess, apply. So if you're an NGO or unregistered, a religious organization unregistered as an NGO, does that prohibit you from running a business?
It prohibits you from making profit.
Well, I guess you have to open a different company.
No, then you have to apply under the medical licenses, and if you have to do it anyway, then why put the religious trade licenses in this format, which is so?
I understand what you're saying. Yeah,
flying in the face of the international.
Makes sense.
One more point on that. Religious import and export. It's non-existent. It's a dream.
Right now?
No. There is no controlled substance on the face of the planet that you can import and export for religious purposes. It's simply not allowed. Domestically or internationally. So it's a nonsensical license. It's never going to be allowed, right? It's controlled substances. This is like telling me, well, okay, we should export.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying.
For their religious use. Not going to happen, right? So it shouldn't be flying in the face. Remember, I told you earlier that the international body said to us here, so long as we don't engage in or allow for increase in illicit exports under the regulated market, they're going to look at this as illicit exports, right? Yeah. Although we're not going to be able to engage in it, right? So why put it to fly in the face?
Why open the door?
In that regard, right? However, in the other side, I do congratulate the former AG in being so bold with going with the law. I never thought that this country would go that direction. And that shows that even if they're getting it a little wrong, right, they have listened to the people and they are reflecting what they've heard, what the All Mansions have been calling for in that direction. I would have preferred if All Mansions told them, listen, we want to make money here. I don't want to see that, we encourage anybody to engage in underhand activities that happens in nonprofit organizations, such as paying their directorship high salaries. We've seen this in some of the largest cancer societies in the US. I think about.
But there's nothing stopping from any member of All Mansions to register as a business,
as a medical licensee and trade for profit. No, there's nothing stopping that, right?
Any other religious group for that matter.
No.
Or any other person in a religious group, I should say, not religious group.
Of course not. They can all apply for medical license. Now, you said religious, right? I actually was the one to separate that Rastafari and Antigua, right? Because the Jamaica had it first with Rastafari, the group they're engaging with. And I spoke to Antigua and I said, Hindu people use it ceremonially.
Exactly.
Taoists use it ceremonially. All this are documented. Maybe we should use it for religion. I think we can encounter a problem with that in my country, though, as much as I'm the one who just told you, I suggested that to them in the first place. Unless there's proper tracking and monitoring and the same measures that are applied to the medical industry for standards and requirements and all that to the religious aspect, then we can have a problem. Why would I go to a physician, pay $300 for that?
That's something I brought up because in the religious part, they just said, can be applied in a specific place. There's no time bound. There's no prescriptive parameters within which they can say one joint in 4 days or one joint in 6 days.
And if there's a lot less overhead,
why would I go to a pharmacy if I could get it every day, every hour in a church or temple or mandir?
So they need to make sure and apply the same regulatory standard plus the same quality standard. Why should I consume cannabis from a medical place that's tested and I'm sure what's going into my body is good? That's what I want. And then why should they not have that? Are their adherents not, shouldn't they have the best quality of consumable product going into their body too? So standards must be applied, just like food is a consumable product. This is to prevent a public health hazard. This is what government is supposed to do. So again, I agree that the government has been a very bold mover in terms of putting forward these provisions, listening to the Rastafari organization, being inclusive enough for it to include all religions, going so far as to license things like religious import and export. It shows that they're listening. I just want to make sure that we do the right thing for our country as a whole. And you guys know I'm a little political myself. So our country as a whole, and think about everybody, right?
Well, you're also a politician registered, so remember that.
Yes, well, registration will come just now. We're not registered. Only a symbol is registered in this country. Yes, sir. Yes.
But you've contested elections before, so.
Yes, 3 times consecutively. I tend to try to think for everybody. As much as I have my own opinions as to what I want the industry to be, I can't apply my own opinions. I have to think about it from every perspective, from those who want it, those who don't want it, everybody, and it seems to me that we should be applying the right part from the international guidelines.
We have to pause for the news, Marcus. You want to hang out with us after it and take some calls with our listeners, because I'm sure, given your knowledge base, you'll be able to help people, guide people through questions about this whole situation.
All right, so hang on a bit. Let's get into our news brief. All courtesy Champlain Auto Services.
This is your news bulletin from Power 102 Digital.
A Guayguari mother of 3 was chopped to death at her home during a domestic altercation with a man whom she knew on Wednesday. Ellen Tashana Mohammed 24, collapsed and died outside her home at Lebre village. Reports indicate her neck was almost severed in the attack. After committing the gruesome act, a Guayguari man flagged down a passing police patrol vehicle and told police officers what he had done. When officers checked the scene, they found Mohammed lying dead near the front doorway of her unfinished home, which overlooks the sea of Lebre village, Guayguari. Health Communication Specialist Salone McDonald of the organization Jubilus says work is taking place to help persons, Jobulus rather, says work is taking place to help persons who have been emotionally hurt in society. This aspect focuses on building them emotionally and mentally by allowing them to work with expertise that is in this field. These professionals have been trained in what has been described as trauma-informed care. It's aimed at restoring individuals' well-being, confidence, self-value, and self-esteem. Research scientist and cannabis advisor Marcus Ramkisson is welcoming the government's decision to continue to push through with the Cannabis Control Bill. Speaking on Power 102 FM's Power Breakfast show a short while ago, Mr. Ramkisson said even if the government gets the bill a bit wrong, the move is a bold one. The internationally sought-after cannabis law advisor explained that this move meant that the government was at least hearing the people's cries and heeding their calls. He says it shows that they are listening, but added that there are still some issues within the bill which need to be addressed, and expressed hope that it will be done before the bill is passed. A notorious Haitian gangster is due to appear in U.S. court on Wednesday for allegedly leading the armed abduction and kidnapping of 17 Christian missionaries last year. Jolly Jermaine, 29, is said to be a leader of the 400 Mawozo gang, infamous for holding foreigners for ransom. Some of the alleged missionary captives seized by the criminal group were held for 2 months before escaping. The ordeal brought international attention to gang abductions in Haiti. And Russia would see Finland's ascension to the NATO military alliance as a threat, and the move would not contribute to more security, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said on Thursday. As we have said many times before, NATO expansion does not make the world more stable and secure, Peskov told reporters after Finland's top politicians announced their support for an application for NATO membership. Peskov added that Russia's reaction will depend on the development of NATO military infrastructure. That was your 8 o'clock news update. Look out for news in full coming up at 12 noon.
Do you need to get work done on your vehicle? Look no further than the Auto Champions, Champlain Auto Services. From vehicle inspection to shutdown service, they do it all. Champlain Auto Services, great mechanics and technicians, exceptional customer service with accessories galore. Champlain Auto Services is your one-stop shop. They are your Auto Champions. You name it, they can fix it. Champlain Auto Services, Eastern Main Road, opposite Carib. Call 662-6545 and like us on Facebook. Champlain Auto Services. We do it all.
Up to date and credible. Power 102 Digital.
All right, thank you so much, Champlain Auto Services, for powering our news brief. Thank you so much. They're on the Eastern Main Road in Champlain. Cannot miss them. You can call 662-6545, like them on social or follow them. Anything to deal with your vehicle. They also do fleet management. Anything from batteries, tires, alignment, to general repairs. They do it all right? That's Champlain Auto Services. Quickly, before we get into Marcus, traffic is absolutely horrendous still this hour of the morning. Coming out to Diego Martin, you'll get some traffic out of Maraval on particular roads. Going up Lady Young Road from Mova to the Lookout, you've got it. All right? And of course, usual spots. You're going to get traffic, you will get traffic this morning. All right? All right, let's get back into our guest, Marcus.
All right, before we continue with the conversation, I just wanted to say a big happy birthday to Gaylan. Today is Gaylan's birthday, and I know so many of our listeners know Gaylan and love her bad. So happy birthday, Gaylan, and a big kiss from the Power Breakfast Show. Mwah! Hope you're having a fantastic day, whatever you're doing.
I thought you stopped counting birthdays. Absolute silence. Marcus, good morning once again.
Happy birthday, Gaylan.
Yeah. So, Marcus, you know, as we started back the conversation, I wanted to tackle the retail license. because I mean, you're looking at all the technical aspects and getting the law right, which is correct in terms of that view. But for a lot of Trinidadians and Begonians who are not interested in becoming exporters, who are just end users of the product, how does this bill affect them?
Okay, so again, I needed to clarify earlier the point of the dispensary as I did, because, you know, someone in the administration did explain it wrong. But dispensary is meant to be conceptually, and according to the way the bill is laid out in the interpretation section and everything else, it's really meant to be a standalone operation. It's not meant to be the dispensary in a pharmacy. Otherwise, we will not have the allowance for consumption in such dispensary. That can't happen in a regular pharmacy, right?
Yeah.
So a pharmacist will be on board to dispense or to supervise dispensation as with a pharmacy. The medicinal cannabis dispensary will follow, or supposed to follow, all guidelines of which will be tackled in the regulations. Guidelines of a pharmacy. So your secure storage, your back room, your area for narcotics. Well, it's all going to be narcotics in those dispensaries. So you're going to have a bigger area. And it's going to be set up accordingly. A reception area that's closed off from the dispensary for the reception or security to be able to check your documents, assess your recommendation on medicinal cannabis card. Well, in this case, just the recommendation in Trinidad, before letting you in, where you can access what is now an adult area, right? Children are not allowed. So this brings us back to the point I was saying about the traditional method of using medicinal cannabis that you're now asking about the end user. They want to go in there as a patient and they want to see 20 varieties of cannabis flower, if they're allowed to do so by their recommendation. They're allowed to partake by their recommendation, of course. And because, of course, look, the recommendation, psychiatry is a big part of this. Varmadi Alsingh said yesterday he was interested in getting a psychiatrist on the board and all that stuff. And it's important because a lot of them were concerned about mental health fallout. This idea of issuing a medical recommendation or prescription, either or, the patient is first evaluated using a standardized form that includes, again, through my recommendations to countries, hopefully will be accepted here also, that includes a primary psychological evaluation that is not your general primary psychological evaluation, but is guided by both cannabis use disorder guidelines, drug abuse and addiction guidelines, and guidelines that are looking for specific areas of mental illness, such as schizophrenia. You don't want to actively allow a person who suffers from something like schizophrenia to use THC cannabis, right? Because THC is not, it's against the disease. It would work for the disease. It would accelerate the symptoms of such disease. Mind you, I'm not saying THC alone. CBD can work the same way in terms of it being not usable with certain medications. If you're on warfarin and heparin, let's say, and you need those things after surgery and all that, you can't use CBD. You know, the warfarin and heparin will not work, right? And the pharmacists in this country and around the world are not telling you yet. You go into a pharmacy in Trinidad that carries CBD and you say, pharmacist, can I use CBD with any other medication? And they're like, of course, it's very safe. No, it's not, right? These are why the contraindications to use, that's the word I was trying to remember just now, sorry, it's early. Contraindications to use for CBD, which means the drug-to-drug interactions, the drug-disease interactions and all that, must be considered. This is why the training for the medical practitioners and pharmacists was suggested also, because as much as the Minister of Health in the Senate came out and said, and I was so happy to hear it, that the University of the West Indies, the School of Medicine, a number of other recognized institutions within Trinidad and Tobago have already issued medicinal cannabis coursework for upcoming practitioners, which is huge. We are now in the 1% of medical schools that do that internationally, as opposed to teaching that is just a dangerous drug, right? But yeah, all those physicians who have completed their coursework, this training, which includes knowledge of the endocannabinoid system, contraindications to use as I just described, and dosing, is important for these guys to understand, so they won't think something is safe like CBD, whereas it won't be safe for a patient on certain medications, right? So I think the end user is perfectly secure so long as the administration understands and puts forward the dispensary in the right format. Again, hopefully we will see the prescribable and non-prescribable medicinal cannabis differentiation come up within the regulations or amended within the primary and Senate. We don't know yet. And that will lead to, because you get it now, right? Prescribable medicinal cannabis is issued by prescription. You get it at a pharmacy, cool, just as normal. Then within those medications, some will be over the counter, which you can just go in and buy like normal, and some will be prescription only, right? Which you must get. Yeah. And then with the non-prescribable medicinal cannabis, that's issued by a recommendation. You go to a medicinal cannabis dispensary where you can see the cannabis flowers, smell it. Whole place is smelling inside, not outside, because there are specific rules for that, of cannabis, and therefore no children should be allowed in a place like this, like is allowed in a pharmacy. This is where St. Vincent is going to have their problem because they didn't separate. So now their pharmacies are going to have medicinal cannabis flower, and you walk in there with a child and it's going to smell like cannabis. What are we doing? We're psychologically desensitizing children to cannabis by doing those things from an early age, which will increase their risk-taking behavior towards it, right? Because they're now desensitized to the risk of it, right? And that's something that we should avoid at all costs. It's akin to allowing alcohol in the supermarkets, which we do. Thank God it's on one aisle only, but it shouldn't be there. Those things should be in alcohol dispensaries completely, not a dispensary, sorry, a liquor store, right? That's specialized for alcohol, so that where children are not allowed, right? So it's the same reference. And then we spoke about use in the bill, in a dispensary. Are you saying we should have pharmacies? Or can I go in Superfarm then and consume cannabis? That's not. Yeah.
I get you. So dispensaries are going to be like standalone places that only deal with the issue of marijuana, prescribed and non-prescribed.
Of the non-prescribable, the one that is recommended, right? And the pharmacy will continue to deal with
the prescribed, like a normal prescription.
Correct. And again, allow our country to be the first in the world. Remember, everybody's saying we backward, we fall behind. Well, let us be first in this law and something now, right? Now that the research is available to set the standards for prescribable only medication and over the counter, let's do it. You know, it can be taken care of in the regulations. I agree with the Honorable Minister for Local Government that it can be taken care of in the regulations in that respect. So the end user is perfectly taken care of, and I think we can form a budding industry. I'm concerned about the clause for the medical cultivator that in essence prevents the medical cultivator from selling their cannabis flower to the retailer. It has to go through a processor first. And that's a little weird because I don't want to see a situation where we have hundreds or thousands of medical cannabis cultivators and 2 or 3 processors. That comes back sugar cane and cocoa long time and these things, and going in colonialization kind of line.
Going back to kind of monopoly.
Exactly. So we want to make sure that the processor, if they go that direction, if they don't change the clause to allow for the cultivator to sell to the retailer, as is done in most other jurisdictions around the world, right, including the region, then they should at least make a statement that the processor license is becoming unnecessary step. The cultivators should be able to package their product because they're meeting all the large requirements of the regulations anyway, and it's a lot, right? Able to do this business, and they should be able to package and sell to the retailer, not to the consumer, but to the retailer.
The retailer. The retail license, tell me about that a little bit.
That retail is the dispensary I just described, except that they didn't use the terminology I would have preferred, which is the international body would have preferred, which is the medicinal cannabis dispensary. They use the retail because Barbados used the same terminology, retail, which, it should have been medicinal cannabis dispensary. But
so in other words, the retail, the actual selling under a retail license only comes under the recommended non-prescription medicinal cannabis. Am I right in saying that?
That's what it's supposed to be, right? And because we don't have yet in our bill the prescribable, non-prescribable differentiation and separation, then if it's not placed in the correct way, then we can get confused. We can see cannabis flowers in pharmacies and a pharmacy having to get that license also to sell, whereas they already sell CBD. For the last 5 years, CBD products have been on the shelf.
You can get CBD oil and stuff like that.
I said earlier, illegally, because remember 2 things. CBD is still cannabis in Trinidad and Tobago. Cannabis is a dangerous drug in Trinidad and Tobago under the laws, right? And therefore, if it has to be sold in a pharmacy, it's supposed to be prescription only behind the counter. That makes all the products illegal, 1. 2, we discussed earlier, the Chemistry, Food and Drugs Division in Trinidad and Tobago is supposed to assess and approve all products that are being sold in a pharmacy. To date, I've confirmed up to what we in May, February was the last time I've confirmed with them. They have not yet approved any CBD product for sale in Trinidad and Tobago. So for those two reasons, all CBD products are illegal in Trinidad. And the problem is, because they haven't assessed it. Look, the US did a big study in 90 products just recently. It's a big study. And out of the 90 products, only 12 of them had what they said they had in it. Some of them had THC, some of them had fungus, some of them had no CBD at all, right? It's so.
Yeah. What happens when you're unregulated?
And that's what the market is so unregulated in the US right now, that's where we're getting most of our products from, that's what we could be buying off the shelf. So people paying the money, plenty money for CBD oil and saying why they say working, and that time it had no CBD in it.
Yeah.
So all the problems that I think that the at the respective bodies, Chemistry, Food and Drugs, I don't blame the government for this, right? I blame Chemistry, Food and Drugs Division, right? So that gentleman, my friend, Mr. Khan, right, who's now in charge, right, should pick up the responsibility, especially now that we're passing the medical aspect, and start approving products that have been being sold for 5 years. And somebody needs to ask the question, who's been importing these products for 5 years if it's illegal?
Yeah.
I know
maybe it's just coming in.
Maybe it's just coming in. But how it's clearing customs.
Maybe it's just somebody coming in a suitcase. I don't know. But we could open up the lines at this point. Of course, we are speaking to Marcus Ramkisson, and if you're following the conversation, you may have some questions that we have not asked. So 222-TALK, 222-8255, 612-8255. North Americans, of course, you can also weigh in toll-free at 866-525-1099. And well, people on the web and the app, you can probably send your questions, if you have any, via the messaging portal on those respective platforms. But we're talking cannabis legislation. Is it how far off is it from being approved, do you think, Marcus?
Oh no, well, once it goes back into Senate, probably, not probably, on Tuesday, it should be passed.
Yeah.
There are no amendments. If there are amendments, then as my understanding is that it needs to go back to House to debate again, and then come back into the
Senate again. Yeah. Is it that you had certain concerns that you raised in the last hour with regard to the current bill? Is it that you're going to make those recommendations or your concerns known? I mean, you did here, and you did to the independent senator. Who can certainly raise it, but is it that you're doing a formal submission of some sort?
I've done formal submissions to the GSC already, but those, again, we're not seeing it being reflected in its entirety. We did see the prescription and recommendation, pharmacy and dispensary, very important, but we do need to see the prescribable, non-prescribable added to that aspect to make that functional and fluid. Otherwise, it simply won't be, right? We'll have the mix-up. I just said, for all the problems we just raised, no cannabis should be in a pharmacy. Right? No cannabis flowers should be in a pharmacy.
Right. All right, we have a call here. Good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
Not bad. How are you?
Good morning, Richard. I'm great. I just hope that for the person as knowledgeable as Mr. Ramkisson, from what I've been listening to the entire program, that government is wise enough to use him and use his knowledge so that we get it right when we first implement all of these things. Because just coming out of the United States just about 1 week ago when I was there, you were actually seeing there was the whole movement where people are rushing to get their license to have exactly what he's saying about the dispensaries, to have outlets that are just exclusive to cannabis. And there were huts or little booths outside of certain buildings that are being rented and licensed to sell it outside of stores. So I hope that Mr. Ramkisson is going to be one of those main persons with the government to make sure that we get it right. I am not a user, my son is, but I follow it very closely. So thank you very much, Mr. Ramkisson, for imparting so much knowledge to us and clearing up a lot of gray areas for some of us. Thank you very much. And Steve, great show as usual.
All right. It's a team effort. Thank you so much.
Welcome.
All righty. Take care.
I just want to say thanks to the caller, of course, for her comments. And so I have been, after much ado and trying in 2018, from 2019 for 10 months, I have been a major contributor working officially with the former AG at the Attorney General's office on the decriminalization and this bill. It's just, as I said earlier, in case you missed it, they didn't accept everything. Like most governments, they wouldn't accept everything an advisor says. So there is room for improvement. Unfortunately, from this first inception, I wish we could have gotten it absolutely right from the first inception. There is room for improvement, but as the former Attorney General has said, and I agree, a lot of things can be taken care of in the regulations. I just want to see that it gets some assurance that it will happen in this direction and not go the wrong way. Yeah?
Yeah. All right. 222-8255, 612-8255, toll-free North Americans, 866-525. 1099. Good morning, caller.
Hey, morning, you
Mr. Patrick, good morning.
Morning, Mr. Patrick.
Good morning, sir.
Yes, Mr. Patrick, go ahead.
I'm trying to draw the both together. Cannabis use and domestic violence. Cannabis use and domestic violence. I mean, there are a lot of cannabis users. And there are some people, when they use the cannabis, some people get calm, and some people start to see green man and behave very erratic. So I wonder if somebody, young men or people who abusing women, violating women's rights.
Well, caller, if I may, I'd like to ask you, have you ever seen, in your experience, a person who using cannabis alone, not with alcohol, not with any other drugs, has been violent? Because I would like to know personally, from my own knowledge and experience, I'd like to know from you. Do you know?
All right.
I don't want to know who. Right. I just want to make sure that it's at someone.
All right. Yeah. All right. As a person on the street life, but I understand the street system blocks and things, right? Yes. I have been around blocks since I was young. I run blocks since.
Yeah, Mr. Patrick, go ahead. I have a lot of calls coming through.
Yeah, let me talk. I run blocks since they selling marijuana in the little pan, the chip-fill pan. So I know about marijuana. Right. If I want to compress Lucy, Red, this, that. As if you take marijuana, pure marijuana, you won't get us. Pure marijuana, you won't get us. You understand? Low key, you won't get us.
Thanks.
Right?
Low key. Thank you. Yes.
But Ragoobarsingh, you asked a question this morning. If you don't come back to that after, you come back to that after. All right.
All right.
All right.
I didn't hear the last part, but
he said I asked some question, but I'm not so sure which question he's referring to. But we have some other.
That he did confirm. He did.
Yeah.
All his experience on the blocks from long ago, he can tell you once you use pure cannabis, meaning not with any additives or any other drugs, because the Colombian stuff that came in illegally for decades, right? Sometimes when the guys down here didn't pay money for it properly and paid it came in laced with other things. There's sometimes with Gramazone, sometimes it came in laced with other drugs to make it more addictive. So when you use pure cannabis, no, you don't see any violent tendencies. Now, regular users who have been without their cannabis, right? Yes, it can become psychologically addictive in use, can become very irritable, right? You don't use. Right, they wake up in the morning like coffee people, and they say, well, everybody knows, I must have my coffee, otherwise I've X. It's the same thing with cannabis, right? Just to let you know. Violent tendencies, no, it's actually studied in research to show the opposite. Thanks.
All right. Good morning. Good morning, caller.
Yeah, good morning to the Bedford School.
Yeah, you need to speak up a little bit for me.
Yeah, good morning, sir.
Yeah, good morning. Yeah, good morning to the Bedford School, and good morning to you, Mr. Ramkisson. Could you elaborate for me on what is the difference between the Indica and the Sativa? because a lot of people don't understand that. So could you give us some information on that, please?
Between the
Indica and Sativa, right?
Okay.
So basically, first of all, I'll go into hemp, right? Hemp is cannabis, right? It's the same cannabis plant. It's just whatever variety of cannabis is under a regulated amount of THC by whatever law per country, those are hemp, right? That's all hemp is. It's not the male form of cannabis or something some other people are saying, right? It's regulated. Indica and Sativa are two varieties of cannabis naturally, and it can be argued that they're more, but by the international standards, still, unfortunately, that classifies all plants and so forth. It's cannabis sativa and cannabis sativa lineus, right? Which are the only two real classifications. There's been many suggested to the international bodies of changing it to cannabis sativa and indica and ruderalis and a number of things, right? But those are the two main varieties. And we within the industry as breeders in that part of the industry look at a number of different areas, but three main things, right? Just to be simple. Sativa, which usually includes plants that are longer to grow, they're taller, different physical characteristics, and different cannabinoid characteristics. Sometimes they make you feel more up and alive and well, not alive, but up and mentally acute and all these things. Indicas usually grow in different parts of the world at different heights and all that, bigger leaves, different plant structure, usually contains more myrcene, which is one of the terpenes. And because of that aspect of the terpene, it can feel more, I didn't want to use the new word narcotic, but it gives you the couch lock feeling, the relaxed feeling, the body high and all that stuff. Ruderalis comes from the Russian area, which is a fast-growing plant that's called an autoflower. If you've ever heard the term autoflower, they're Ruderalis strains that are pure or mixed with indicas or sativas to get them to flower automatically without you having to switch the photoperiod, the light cycle. So different varieties, not strains. Within each type, they're strains. And then if you mix them, they're called hybrids. So basically, that's...
Okay. All right. Marcus, is there any law, we have drinking and driving. Is there anything regarding using cannabis and driving and so on?
Yes. Within our Motor Vehicle and Traffic Act, that's Chapter 4850, I think, yes, is the inclusion for drug and drunk driving. Right? So drug includes cannabis at this point in time and would even include prescription drugs. Problem is, there's no real device that would accurately test whether the user is currently impaired in the situation or not, because a lot of the chemical screening devices that are used within the industry in other countries test for a certain specified amount of THC, and that can actually be in your system from use the night before or use before in some cases, depending on the amount. And for that reason, the chemical screening tests are not worthy, in my opinion, and there's a lot of false positives and negatives with it. So therefore, they can be argued in court, showing the science of the false positives and negatives, and we're just wasting time and spinning top in mud, right? Mm-hmm. There's a question around the world, Steve, mind you, so you've raised a very important question. There is a way to address it. A lot of people don't know. I've been pushing it for the last number of years because I've discovered it back then. Students in a university developed a device that they call the Guard X device. It's an impairment detection device. It's a little briefcase with a little eye hole. You put your eyes in it and 2 fingers, and it does 6-day eye test and a couple different pulse tests. And it can tell you if you're impaired, even if you've used something. And what a chemical screening test would normally say, yes, it wouldn't if you're not actually impaired. And this is something that we need to employ in every country, not just Trinidad, and not just use on the road and road checks and stuff, but use in employment positions that require safety. So safety positions in employment, right? You don't know if a person is coming in intoxicated with anything, right? Or impaired with anything, even prescription drugs. So those are devices that should be applied to safety positions. And now that we have the technology going forward.
Yeah, we need something like that for the people who operate the board in Power 102.
I will deal with you, Richard. We have a call. Good morning.
Morning to the panel and morning to Mr. Ramkisson.
Morning.
Over the last years, they have found 69 properties in relation to cannabis. The main 9 we know about, which is the same THC and CBD oil and CBD and so on. They said one of the properties that they found was also found in the DNA of humans. Do you have any information in relation to that literature? Why the body does certain things because it recognizes it from way back you were exposed? And the next thing,
okay, yes. Right. I hear you. Okay.
Yeah, he has another question. Go ahead, caller.
And in relation to the patent that the U.S. has on all the marijuana strains that before what is being developed now, like the hybrid that Warren Buffett and these people are developing now. What will be the position in the future in relation to the U.S. holding the patent? If people want to do certain things, would the U.S. be collecting royalties on whatever other people around the world produce because they hold the patent? Also, Israel has a part to play in it, but I'll leave it there for now. And it's okay.
All right. Okay. Marcus?
Yeah. We got bright fellow boy online. He going behind the scenes and asking the real questions. Okay. This question basically applies to some research that has been done recently that basically demonstrates that within our DNA system and the DNA system of a number of mammals, we can definitively say that cannabis has been a part of it because, of course, we've developed the endocannabinoid system, but it's also the availability for our receptors. And it's not just the cannabinoid receptors. There are receptors in the body, chemical receptors in the body, in your brain, in your body, non-cannabinoid receptors that work with cannabinoids, meaning THC and CBD and so forth. They are, just for the viewer, since he seems the listener, since he seems knowledgeable, there are 146 identified cannabinoids to date, just to let you know, and isomers of such included. So that's his first question. The second question is, yes, the US government and Department of Health does hold a patent on all cannabinoid medicines, right? And the cannabinoids of all cannabis plants. So it's a very interesting question as to where the future will go and whether royalties will have to be paid and so forth. However, patents don't last forever, as most people do not know, right? Patents last for a period of time, right? After which more people can access. And I think patents of that nature can only last maybe 30 years maximum. I think it'll be about 12 from my little knowledge in that area. So I don't think we'll see an issue, but it is always worthy to ask the question because yes, the patent is still effective and is owned by the US government and no one else can get one since it's owned by them. So it's a very curious situation. And that was done for your listeners years before it was decriminalized in the US. Somebody had foresight in terms of the US government.
All right. We have another one. Good morning.
Yeah. Good morning.
Morning.
Yeah, the question I was about to ask Mr. Ragoobarsingh is talking about if women are adequately protected, right?
That was our poll this morning, yes.
Yeah. The question I wanted was asked, by whom? By whom or who? If women are adequately protected, by whom or by who?
The state.
I know the philosophy.
Yeah, but Mr. Patrick, we're not dealing with that right now, you know.
We're not dealing with that, Mr. Patrick, but the issue would have been the state by legislation, by systems, by institutional infrastructure, all of that, which will come under the rubric of the state. So that's how it would be understood. Yeah.
Churches mandate rumors and churches preach.
Yeah, all right. Thanks, Mr. Patrick.
All right. But the question I want to ask now, so the Mr. Ramkisson, right? Since the government opened up the door, right? The government opened up the door. What regulations have in place underage children, getting involved in this substance? Because
but it's only the legislation makes it very clear. it's only applies to adults aged 18 and over. Well, the legal age of adulthood in Trinidad and Tobago is 18.
But we see that a lot of school children using this thing all about the place.
Yeah.
Well, look, when in a regulated market, sir, what happens is, my friend, in a regulated market, you find that first of all, you can only get it as an adult in a regulated market. The regulated market is open, and adults have the way to get it. Again, if the market runs effectively, right, then we can have a better product at a lower price than the illicit market. On the regulated market, adults will source their products on the legal market, and then what's left? What's left for the illicit market? Children? Do you think the illicit market will continue based on the sales of children alone? It will not. We will dismantle the illicit market with a properly regulated market for medicinal cannabis and for cannabis.
Yeah. All right. Okay. So we had a call. I just lost it. We have a few minutes with Marcus Ramkisson again. 222-8255, 612-8255. Toll free North Americans, 866-525-1099. Good morning, caller.
Good morning. I don't like Mr. Trincity's question, Trincity's question, because there's nothing to regulate children from alcohol or any other thing that is legal in the country. Yeah. You just have a personal responsibility.
Yep.
Right? However, my question is this. What I'm seeing, what I'm envisioning happening here with this whole cannabis industry is for all these years, the Little Black Boy and Cedrus and Beach and all these places are the people who have been planting and cultivating cannabis for all these years. But when it becomes regulated, for some reason, all of a sudden you're going to have a $300,000 fine to pay for to get your license, and you'll find all the elites are the ones in place to have the legal thing, cannabis.
My brother, let me interrupt you and keep you on the line for a second, right? Let me put it to you this way. If the license is free, and it's not going to be, if the licenses were free, right? Like, right? And it's not going to be that high, first of all. I think they're going to emulate Barbados, which is actually the cheapest in the region at about $3,000 US. If you're cultivating like Indica, about $3,000 US a year, all right, 15,000 for 5 years, right? So it's going to be cheap considerably. But even if it were free, do you know that it would cost you a minimum for an outdoor, the cheapest cultivation facility, right, as an acre? It would cost you no less than about $80,000 US to do an acre. It's not including the land or the rent or the price of the land. That is just to set up the land to meet the standards and the regulations, security, quality standards, and all that.
So this validates my point that the people who have been doing it for years, illegally for years, they are still not going to have to be doing it illegally because they're still not going to get to be qualified to do these things the legitimate way.
Right. Right. So I'll answer your point. Thanks for your point. I'll answer it.
Thank you, caller.
So yes, he's correct, right? Because like any consumable product industry, it's not cheap to get into. It's like water, guys. Why you think we have big water companies now? Why you think we're spending so much money? Why you don't bottle water from your tap and sell it? You can't. You have to meet certain regulations because it's a consumable product, meaning a product going into your body, right? Used in the body or on the body. You need to meet certain health standards and all that. And to meet those standards, it's for any consumable product. We have micro industries that does jam and pepper sauce and thing, but realistically, we're not meeting the standards to export that to developed countries yet, right? Our GMP regulations are not really met by those facilities to the extent that they're supposed to be met for export, right? So those things in all consumable industries, you're going to find that problem. How do we solve it, right? The governments in the region, some of them, with the exception of actually governments in the region, all of them so far, has tried to solve it by allowing a citizen of the country, as in Jamaica, or a citizen of the CARICOM, as in Barbados and Trinidad, to hold a percentage ownership in every license. Meaning that if a foreign company come down and say they want to do business and whatnot, a local must hold a percentage. And they think, well, okay, well, this is looking out for the local stakeholder. The point that I continue to make, as we've seen in Jamaica over the years, is that when somebody coming to spend $1 million in our business in Trinidad, they're not coming to give up Trinidadian 30%. They're going to someone who can put 30% of the finances into the project, right? And that's the local that they're looking for. So those clauses do not seek to help anyone except persons who are already wealthy. Yes, it will help local citizens, but not the small man, as the gentleman has correctly identified. What is the correct way? The correct way is to implement a proper social equity program that I proposed before and was not taken in by the administration, and I hope it will be at some point in the regulations. It should be mentioned in the primary again, otherwise, you know. And what I'm proposing is actually now being looked at by a couple of states in the US too. I'm very proud of that. Is that persons who meet a certain economic standard, who don't receive more than a certain amount each year, or persons who are mentally or physically disabled to the point where they cannot work in regular industries but may find a position in this industry, can apply under social equity program. This is, again, caller, this is, and for you guys, this is Paul still with us here, by the way?
Yeah, Paul, this is Paul's hour where he does whatever he does is a big secret.
We call it TT time.
It's a big secret.
I wanted him to hear this part because he can't raise it anymore because he contributed already, but at least in the committee stage, that apply under social equity program. So here how I envision it, right? If you're from St. Joseph, let's say, and you don't have the money to get into the industry, you meet the requirements, you apply under the program, and the authority will now collect the applications and will put you together with other people from your area. So you might know the fellow down the road, the fellow from up the hill, want to get into the business too, and all of them apply, but nobody have the money to get into it. They are also small farmers and small people, so you cannot expect them to become entrepreneurs and businessmen and CEOs overnight, right? So they have to be guided. The authority should then guide them into registering a company with equal sharing partners, group them into groups of like 50 people if there's that amount of applicants in per area, right? And get them to form a company, help them maybe by granting them land or so that they can pay back for after they become profitable, if they become profitable, meaning if they don't become profitable, they don't owe, they just give back the land, they didn't, you know, give them the licenses for free and all that stuff and get them started, you know, so, and they now can pool their resources, maybe together apply for a loan from EDB or somebody or whatnot, and become a company and establishing. So one license will, so you're not going to give 1 million licenses for 1.4 million people, right? You're going to give maybe 200-300 licenses at max, right? And eventually it's going to say, okay, it's saturation, there's no more, right? So all the business will become non-profitable for everybody, non-competitive. If we're doing that, then card off from the beginning, 20% of all licenses to be issued is going to go to these social equity programs, whether people apply for it or not, they card it off for those individuals. And if we have 300 licenses, then 20% is what, 60? We have 240 licenses taking care of 240 wealthy enough groups to run their business, and 60 licenses taking care of 60 by 50. 3,000 people, right, with those 60 licenses alone. So you end up helping more of the small man than the rate. This is the only social equity program, in my opinion, from reviewing the industry internationally that can work, and this is what is being proposed.
Yeah.
Let's take our final call before we wrap up this morning. Good morning, caller.
Good morning, gentlemen.
Mm-hmm.
I have a gift of peeling off the BS that people talk and getting down to the grassroots. So I will translate what that gentleman just said, and you could correct me if I'm wrong, right? In other words, what you're saying there is, to quote the Prime Minister, he believes in empowering the rich, and hopefully the rich will hire the poor and make them richer. So in other words, the weed planters, let me go down to basic conversation. The weed planters that have been weed planters for decades now have to go and work for the big businessmen, the 1% that could afford to pay the $20,000 a month. They have to work under them now. So we don't create business people in the intervention of new business ideas. We still have them working for the big people who could afford to pay the annual.
But that's not what he just explained with his suggestion at all.
But that is what I heard, because if you're telling
the social equity program that Marcus just explained?
No. What he said first about the
cost. Yeah. Well, yeah. So so the cost, yes, he explained that there cost in terms of getting a consumable product to market, and there will be a cost to that. And that's where entrepreneurship and et cetera, comes into it, whether you do loans or whatever. But he also then explained his what I call the SEP, social equity program, whereby how you facilitate those who don't have the money and how you can make them entrepreneurial. So he just explained that, and he said it's a recommendation he has made.
Yes, but let me be quite frank with you. I am the recipient of several grants when they had the rental assistance grant in the COVID lockdown, when I applied for several grants from the government, and all have been approved. No, all have been approved. But I'm waiting almost 2 years to actually get it. So if you will forgive me if I don't have confidence in these things to help you, I don't have a lot of confidence in it because it's a political thing that they do. They say things up there, they say things out there, but people never be able to access it. And the loopholes that they have, you're trying to jump through to get it, it's ridiculous. So you'll forgive me if I don't have confidence in what they say they're trying to put in place for the small man and the small businessman and the entrepreneurs and all these good stuff. All right?
Okay, well, I hear you. Well, that's an issue of institutional trust, which is lacking for a lot of Trinidadians and Tobagonians across the board. That's not just restricted to this conversation.
Just to let you know, caller, I am not part of the day. I am the advisor, or have been the advisor, and all that I have advised has not been taken on board, right? This is here discussing issues that I, as the advisor, have with the present legislation, right? So I'm not part of the day, just to let you know. I am my own independent me. Thank you. So, Steve?
Yeah.
Steve,
all right.
Any more calls or?
No, this is where we have to put a stop to it, Marcus. You kind of run out of time here.
Yeah.
Anything you want to add before we wrap up this morning, Marcus?
Yeah, there's just one more clause in the bill that, again, I was hoping Paul would be here to listen to, but basically there's a clause that says that if you
he's here.
Paul is here.
Okay, right. If you use medicinal cannabis without a prescription or recommendation, you can, face fines and possible imprisonment for up to 10 years. And, guys, we just decriminalized the public smoking of cannabis to no more, although the law is written a little weird, to no more than a $2,000 fixed penalty notice, right? It's not an offense anymore. You're supposed to get a fixed penalty notice for public smoking. How can we now justify in a newer law, right, more recent, putting users into jail for using? The reason we decriminalize the public use of cannabis recently.
But it's not for specifically medicinal use you're referencing there?
No, but then it's the same thing, Paul. It's the same idea.
Well, it's not the same thing. Medicinal use, attaching the word medicine to something has implications in any part of the world. So,
right, but
so you have to have a higher benchmark for the rationale of medicinal use.
I still don't think it's justified for the amount of time and level of penalty after.
Because you could use it recreationally. Why are you saying you're using it medicinally?
Exactly. It's going to be something that's hard to prove in the first place that this product.
Well, then just don't say using it medicinally. But I understand the safeguard in saying medicinal use because medicinal use has to be under certain circumstances.
So we're not allowing recreational use of marijuana?
Yes, we are. You're using it right now recreationally.
Under decriminalization, yes.
You're using it right now recreationally. What I'm saying is that if you are justifying the word medicinal use, there has to be a higher bar attached to that.
But isn't there going to be an overlap in terms of the people who are using it recreationally and the issue of a penalty for non-medicinal use? Isn't there a kind of strange overlap there in terms of?
No, just say you're not using it medicinally. You're using it You may use it recreationally with some medicinal benefits given. You understand? It's a given for that. But you have to have some, in my opinion, some safeguard if you're attaching medicinal use to anything.
Okay, so
a higher bar. But just a difference in opinion. That's my opinion.
What you see in the other jurisdictions, regionally and otherwise, is not a use provision. Because just like, remember, you purchasing cannabis prior to decriminalization wasn't illegal, it was you possessing cannabis, right? You couldn't be charged for using, and you couldn't be charged for buying. You could be charged for either possessing or selling, right? So it's the same kind of application in the sense of the other jurisdictions have seen it fit not to penalize users, but to put this exact provision in place for licensed providers and suppliers. Whereas if the licensed supplier is found to be supplying non-registered patients, then they face a penalty.
As opposed to the user being penalized.
As opposed to the user. And then also, we've even gone further within the Antiguan legislation to say, well, if you, the registered user, meaning the registered patient, allows someone to use who is not a patient, then you stand the penalty of losing your patient identification card, well, for the non-prescribable medicinal cannabis.
But not a fine or imprisonment.
But no fine or imprisonment, so because again, it's you.
I can understand both sides of the argument.
So that's the last point I think
we love to create legislation to put people in jail, Marcus. It's in our DNA,
You know what bothers me? It bothers me that within the public consultation.
Says the lawyer.
In 2019, 5 public consultations I spoke at. A number of the public persons said, life sentence is a problem in the Dangerous Drugs Act. And, the Attorney General and Minister Hines and all that agreed, that should never be in there and whatnot. And after the amendments, life remained. In fact, there was one of the clauses that took up the pecuniary penalty and just left.
Marcus, I'll end in the sarcasm. Welcome to Parliament.
Yeah.
Well, listen, I do have, you guys know I do have my own future political aspirations, and I do believe I'm built for this job. Why? Because I can't be bought. I didn't go into
You see, if you didn't go and form a political party, I'm sure you'd be eligible for being an independent senator.
Yeah, I know, but I know. I just,
I think you should, because I think you would have made it, because of your thought process, you'd have made a great independent senator.
I would have loved the position too, because any
you're going to jump into party politics and mess up yourself.
Anything that can give me the opportunity to contribute to my
country, and I think you have a lot to contribute. Right?
But that's my dream, because I've done a lot in my life, and I consider I don't want to have kids and stuff. I'm a little bit different, right? I like my life, and I've seen a lot, I've done a lot, and the last thing I want to do in my life also is to help and to make a big difference. And
I think this
my country first before going
even with its flaws, and I've said so in my contribution, it is not perfect. It is going to have to be revised in 2-3 years as this phenomenon evolves. It is not.
Which I would have preferred not to do.
Well, in any case, it's going to have to, like any law, all laws have to evolve. Society changes or societies change. So this is not. It's never going to be perfect like any law we make or pass in the country. It is going to have to be amended based on how we see the operationalizing progresses, or if it works the way we want or not. So it's not a fait accompli.
And I agree with you fully, and therefore also agree with my great debating friend, Mr. Faris Sarawi, right? Who I love to have our little debates. I think he mentioned that on the last program he was on also. We like to quarrel a little bit, but we have good, intelligent conversations where, positive matters come to light eventually, So I agree that, with the sentiment that these aspects can be taken care of in the regulations, and I do, of course, as the most qualified, not just in the region, as I said earlier, but internationally, not the most, but one of the most in the world, and most definitely in the region. I do hope to be on board as a consultant to the authority when it's established. I can't be on the board.
Well, I can't see how you could not be a consultant to the authority, because the authority has the ability to hire consultants to advise them, because they will not have all the information. So.
And I've done so many countries that I haven't worked for the government. Like Barbados, I've consulted for the authority, even voluntarily, and guided them through their regulations and their regulation making also. So
I also don't think your expertise should be free. Just putting it on.
Yeah, me too. But for me, I did, for the last job, I went on television to get the interview, and I said on television, if I get the interview, I'll do it for free, so nobody can say I'm overqualified. And they did. Listen, Mr. Arari tried to pay me 100 times during that 10-month time that I worked with him, and I refused each time because I'm principled in that regard.
You need a new manager.
It's not that I don't need money.
All right, call me after. I'll work on you.
You need a manager.
Marcus Ramkisson, Thank you so much for being on the program this morning. All the best to you.
Thanks a lot, Marcus.
All right, all the best. All
There's
right.
no need to sign off now. Bye, everybody.
Well, hold on. Not yet.
Yeah, bye.
No. I have commercials to play. Hang on.
Do you need to get work done on your vehicle? Look no further than the Auto Champions. Champlain Auto Services. From vehicle inspection to shutdown service, they do it all. Champlain Auto Services. Great mechanics and technicians. Exceptional customer service with accessories galore.